Hi everyone, my name is Maddie, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this video where I'm going to be telling you about my 11 top books that I read in 2020, plus a few special mentions. So I've decided to talk about 11 books today for two reasons. Firstly, because I had 11 books I wanted to talk about and I couldn't narrow it down to 10, and secondly because I have actually ended up the year reading 111 books, so talking about 11, we'll be talking about 10% of the books I've read, which is about right, I think, to kind of highlight the top 10%. But I am also going to be giving some sort of special awards to a few other books which either were really close to being on this list or I feel like deserve recognition for some specific aspect, even if they aren't like an all-time favourite for me. The one thing I will say really quickly is normally I would love to have all the books with me for a video like this, obviously they're ones I love, but I don't. I've just moved, I didn't bring all of these books with me. I didn't want to bring too many books I've read. I did bring a lot of them because they're favourites, but certainly not all of them, so there are going to be a lot of pictures on screens for this. I apologise, it's the best we can do in this situation. But we're going to start off with the kind of special mentions before getting into the top 11. So let's just get straight into that. So I have kind of created categories / awards for these special mentions because I want to mention each of them for different reasons. And then I also just added a couple of categories for a bit of fun. So starting off with my best reread of the year. And the reason I'm including this is I don't really want to include a reread on my best of list because otherwise I'd just end up including it every year that I've read it if like an all-time favourite. So I thought I would do a special category for my favourite reread of the year. And if you've been following my channel, you will know that I'm posting something called READALONG, reading the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy by Laini Taylor. This is my best reread of the year. I loved this book so much. The sequel, which I've also just finished, Days of Blood and Starlight, I also loved. I'm kind of talking about the whole series in this, even though I've not reread the third book yet. This is one of my favourite series. I've harped on about it enough times on this channel recently, but I will give you one final very quick synopsis before I shut up about it. This follows a girl called Karou who's a bit strange, a bit mysterious. She has blue hair, she has tattoos, no one really knows where she goes when she vanishes for days on end. But Karou is linked to this guy who's part guy, part beast, depending on what you want to call him, and she has to run some very strange missions for him, missions involving collecting teeth, and she doesn't know why. No one knows why, as I said, all very mysterious. But then one day her connection to this guy gets completely cut off and she gets thrown into this whole fantasy world, and it is phenomenal. It is romance, it is fantasy, it's kind of an urban fantasy in the first book because the main setting is Prague. It's phenomenal. I've been having the best time rereading this, even more so because I'm reading it with the community this time and discussing it with my friends and seeing other people love this series. So that's definitely making the cut for best reread. So the next kind of category award I'm doing is Best Debut, and for this I am choosing Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. This is a phenomenal book. I loved it so much and it is such an important book and such an impactful book, and I do not have enough good things to say about it. I loved reading it. It wasn't like an all-time favourite for me, but that in no way means that it's not a hugely important book that I had the best time reading and have loved seeing the impact it's had on people individually, as well as just the crazy impact it has had on the book internet this year. It's been phenomenal to watch. So for anyone who doesn't know, Cemetery Boys is a YA fantasy story following a boy called Yadriel who is trans, and he is trying to prove to his family that he is trans by doing a sort of ritual to become a brujo. And in doing so, he kind of accidentally summons a spirit who happens to be the school bad boy, Julian. And it's a romance, it's an adventure, it is so good, it's so interesting. I had the best time reading it. I've said that enough times, highly recommend it, by far the best debut I've read this year. Next, I'm going to talk about my favourite cover of the year, which is also attached to a phenomenal book, and that is Felix Ever After by Koushun Calendar. I say this is my favourite cover. I really struggle to decide what like my favourite book covers are because I love so many different aesthetics and so many of them look so good that I just never know which one's my favourite. But nonetheless, I think this cover is beautiful. I love the really vibrant colours, I love the really gorgeous artwork. One of my favourite parts of it is seeing a trans person depicted on the cover of a book with top surgery scars. Just small things like that mean the world to people, and it's a really positive thing to see, and I'm so glad that that was depicted and that was shown, and the author was so happy about it. So that's winning for best cover. It's also a phenomenal book about Felix, who is trans and gets outed at his art school, and he's trying to work out who outed him and why. And it's a gorgeous, hard-hitting YA contemporary story, also with a very sweet romance in it. Love it, really good book. highly recommend people check it out. Next up, I'm giving an award for the most fun book I've read this year, and that is I'll Be the One by Lila Lee. This is another YA contemporary story, and it is so phenomenal. And this follows Sky, who dreams of becoming a K-pop idol, but for many reasons doesn't think she'll ever be able to, mainly due to sort of the cultural norms and what is expected of a K-pop idol. But she auditions for a competition and she gets in, and it follows this K-pop competition, and it's phenomenal, and Sky is amazing, it has a super cute romance in it, and it's also really good because Sky is really fighting for what she wants and fighting against sort of the system and all of this, and it's great. I had the best time reading it. I read it in one sitting, unintentionally, because I was just enjoying it so much, and it brought the biggest smile to my face, and it was definitely the most fun book I've read all year. Next up is the weirdest book I've read this year, and yes, I am putting this in my favourites category. I sometimes like a really strange book. A certain kind of strange, but it works and I enjoy it. And there is one book especially which sprung to mind which I wanted to talk about, and this category just fits it so perfectly, and that is Vita Nostra. This is such a weird book. Like, I could not even begin to describe what this book is about. It's kind of fantastical dark academia. It follows a girl who is approached by a strange person and gets given a challenge, and when she completes it, she kind of like throws up coins, and then she can trade in those coins for things, and then she goes to a special school. I'm not even going to try and explain it because I didn't fully follow it, but in the best way. I had kind of an awesome time reading it, and I would highly recommend checking it out if you can do kind of dark, kind of weird, because it's both of those things, but it's really good fun. So yeah, definitely my weirdest read of 2020. And then on to the final award before we get to like the best books, and this is the most 2020 book of 2020. We all know that 2020 has been the most crazy year that most of us have ever experienced. It has been different from what anyone imagined it would be, and I feel just, I had to talk about this book because it's too hilariously perfect. This is the first book I read in 2020. And it is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. A book about a pandemic that wipes out the human race. And honestly, I know a lot of people at this time don't want to read about pandemics and they find it really upsetting because obviously it's a very serious issue, this pandemic. But at the same time, I just can't help but laugh at the irony that my first read in 2020 was about a pandemic. And so I am officially calling Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11 the most 2020 book I read in 2020. Okay, with those out of the way, we are now actually going to get into my top 11 books that I read in 2020. And I'm not going to be doing these in any particular order. I haven't ranked them. I couldn't separate them enough to do that. They're just books I love so much for such different reasons. So I'm kind of going to do them in like small categories. So we're going to start with YA Contemporary. But then I will say the last two books I will be talking about are my top 2 of the year. They're still not being ranked, but they're my top 2. But as I said, starting with YA Contemporary. So, shock horror, all 3 of the YA Contemporary books I'm going to be talking about are very queer. The first being Verona Comics by Jennifer Duggan. Oh my gosh, I could not describe how much I adore this book. This follows 2 teens, a guy and a girl, who meet at a comic book sort of Comic-Con convention, and they meet, they're both kind of done with the situation, they get on, they have like this one night together, they just talk, but they just really connect. But then the guy realises that they are both children of the 2 basically biggest rival comic book stores. I think Jubilee, the girl's mum, runs quite a small like independent comic book store, and Ridley's father runs like a big chain who is trying to take over all these small stores. So it's kind of a Romeo and Juliet retelling, hence Verona Comics, and it's, you know, this star-crossed lovers, they can't be together, and it's beautiful and wonderful. Both of them are bisexual, which I love. I love seeing bisexual characters in a male-female pairing, and it's sort of found family. So many of the other side characters are queer as well, and it's so good. But my favourite aspect, which I will just say skip for like 15 seconds if you don't want to be spoiled, I don't really consider it a spoiler, is this does not have your generic happy ending. It's not get 2/3 of the way through, big breakup, get back together. This deals with so much more than that, and it deals with like how complex a relationship can be and how a relationship can't necessarily be healthy, and about how a relationship could actually not necessarily be healthy even if it is people trying to do the right thing. It's just so good, and I loved it so much, and I would highly recommend it. Next is Camp by Elsie Rosen. Ooh, I love this book. This follows Randy, who goes to a summer camp every summer and normally does the musical theatre programme and hangs out with all his musical theatre friends and all the other queer kids, and it's great. But this summer, he has completely changed himself. He has changed into a sort of very mask stereotype, because there is a guy at the camp who he is in love with, and that guy only goes for other masked guys. So he's completely changed himself. He signs up for all the sports for the summer to try and get the guy, and that may not be a good message, but that's actually kind of my favourite thing about it. It's the reason I love this and Rona comics, is that the teens are messy. The teens do some really awful things and act really badly, which is realistic. People make mistakes. They do what they think might be sensible, even if it's really stupid. And I love seeing that depicted in books. And the musical theatre references in this meant the world to me, and the way some of the issues were talked about, just, I was in tears at the end of this book. I loved it so much. There's so many gorgeous moments, and oh, I just love it so much. I will say though, due to Randy completely changing himself, he does actually lie to his love interest about who he is, and so there is a level of manipulation involved. That is very much a case, but obviously it is addressed in the book. However, if you're not comfortable reading about that, that is completely understandable. But I personally love this book with my whole heart and think it is absolutely phenomenal. And then the final of the YA contemporary books I want to talk about is Loveless by Alice Oseman. This is a phenomenal book following an Arrow Ace main character who is going off to university for the first time, and it's talking about her university experience and her coming to terms with and discovering what it even means to be Arrow and Ace. And I personally love this book. I have seen some valid criticism of some of the rep of the side characters, specifically to do with race, and so I would suggest looking up Own Voices reviews for things like that. Personally, I found the Arrow Ace rep really interesting, really informative, and it is also Own Voices for a Spectrum rep, and obviously Own Voices stories where they're available are fantastic normally, and I really enjoyed this. Strangely, although all the LGBT rep was fantastic, that wasn't even the reason I loved the book so much. It was the main character's experience going to uni and how they felt when they were at uni that really stuck out to me. Less so in their first year, but the way they experienced everything in the book was so similar in so many ways to my second and third year at university, and just reading it really hit home for me and I really loved it. There's not very many books that I've read that are set at university, and I love reading that anyway, and just seeing that experience sort of so clearly laid out was really nice to see. Also, this character was involved with their university's theatre group, which is something I was very heavily involved with at university, and again, it was so spot on accurate for what theatre groups are like at university, or at least like mine was. So again, it was just really great to see, and I, again, cried my eyes out reading this book. I hugged it for an hour after reading it. It just really hit home for me, and I loved it so much. So as we just spoke about some contemporary, I may as well carry on and kind of move into adult contemporary, starting with an adult romance book, which is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. Oh my god, I love this book. I loved Get a Life, Chloe Brown. It was great fun, but Take a Hint, Danny Brown really was just the one for me. This follows Danny, who is a PhD student. She is bisexual, and she has decided she's done with men. She wants a friends with benefits situation. She doesn't want to date, she doesn't have time, doesn't have energy, just needs something to satisfy her needs. And then there's Zaf, who's a massive hopeless romantic, spends his life reading romance novels, wants the great romance, and is utterly besotted with Danny. And it's just phenomenal. It's so good, it's so cute, it's so sweet. Again, I love the kind of reality of a relationship that is shown, even in like a romance novel where it's, you know, glamorized and made to seem romantic. I really enjoyed the reality still shown, and it just made me so happy reading it. We love it. We love it so much. Then moving on to the next book in the very different tone, we have a hard-hitting adult contemporary, and that is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This was such a beautiful story. It was such a beautiful book. I was just entranced right from the beginning, and it was almost very difficult to read because it is so sort of assaulting, reading something so graphic about the topic, which I'll do a synopsis in a second. But I just felt like it was so fascinating, and I feel like it made me empathise with people in these sort of situations even more so, because although obviously it's nothing like experiencing it, seeing it so graphically written in such a just blatant way, it wasn't romanticising it, it wasn't saying it was bad, it's just kind of relaying the events that happened, just made it really hit home what these sort of situations can be like. So a bit of a synopsis, because obviously this book does come with significant trigger warnings for assault and rape and grooming and all of this, and I would advise looking up trigger warnings because I'm sure I've missed some because I did read this right towards the beginning of the year. But this follows Vanessa, who in the year 2000, when she was at school, she was 15, basically starts a romance and a relationship with her teacher. And she has always viewed this as a completely consensual thing. She always thought it's what she wanted, and it was like the cool thing to do. And you see throughout the book that it goes on for years and years and years, on and off. And then you also see 2017, where people are coming out against him for grooming and paedophilia and all of these things. And she's approached to kind of come out against him and is surprised because she's always considered it sort of, you know, it was fine, it's what it was. And then she very much has to confront what that situation actually was for her and think about it and change her view of things. And it's just a fascinating book. You switch between the two timelines. I loved it so much. It's beautifully written. As I've already said though, please be careful if this is not a book that is suitable for you to read, because obviously it deals with some very upsetting topics, which is not for everyone. Next, moving more into the realm of source for literary fiction story, I want to talk about Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is a very well-known and very well-loved book, and I didn't think it would be the sort of book for me from what I knew about it, and then I found out it was a book about books. It follows someone who is the son of a bookseller, and he gets sort of told about this weird vault of books, and he gets to choose one, and all very strange and mysterious, and it does turn into a mystery story, and I think it's set in like the 50s or something in America. I'm not completely sure. It's slightly historical though, and oh my god, it was amazing. I loved this so much. The writing was beautiful, but the thing that really got me was how intricately and cleverly the plot was constructed. The way things were built up to but not revealed, so that when they were revealed, it just blew your mind but made perfect sense. I was astonished and so impressed, and this is a new all-time favourite for me. I loved it so much. It is absolutely one I will be rereading in the future, probably a decent way in the future, because I want to make sure I've forgotten so much of the detail and as many of the big reveals as possible before I read it again so I can fully experience it. But it was so, so good. As I said, it's like a mystery, it has romance, it has so many different aspects to it, and they're all executed phenomenally. So that is one of the best books I read. Then moving into the realm of slightly weird adult fiction, we have Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. I love this book so much. This is another book about books with a slightly mysterious bookseller. I'm just realising we have a bit of a theme going on. And this follows Clay, who is in San Francisco and has lost his job as a graphic designer and comes across this 24-hour bookstore and ends up working as a night clerk there. So he works there all night. And he notices these strange kind of people coming into the store and asking for specific books. And he's been told, you know, certain people have a certain membership that will let them take out these very specific books on a loan. And he starts to notice a pattern that he can predict which books people are coming in for. And so using technology, he does clever things. I won't say more. It's very mysterious. It's very much set in modern day San Francisco, but there's a lot of mystery going on. It almost feels slightly magical. It's really, really good. And I loved it so much. Another one that's very popular and I never thought I would read and then read, and it's a new favourite. So yeah, so good. The next two books I'm going to be talking about are both by the same author, and if you have been watching some of my videos, you probably know who this author is and what books I'm going to be talking about. And they are The House in the Cerulean Sea and The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune. So I read TJ Klune for the first time this year, and even after reading one book I thought he was going to be a new favourite author. Having read two, I'm pretty damn certain. And he has so many other books which I'm going to be getting to in 2021, or at least some of them hopefully. And oh my god, just phenomenal. So we will start with the one I read first of his, which is The House in the Cerulean Sea. This is an adult story, though it's very much referred to as middle grade for adults, just because kind of the tone it's told with. You could read this to a child. They may not get the intricacies, but they would get the plot and they would get the vibe. This follows Linus, who works at a very sort of boring bureaucratic place which takes care of kids in orphanages. And he is bored of his job, bored of his life, basically just pretty miserable. But he gets sent out to this orphanage to basically assess, is it being run correctly, are the kids safe to stay there? And at this orphanage, he discovers that all the kids are magical. There is a gnome, there is a kind of creature called Chauncey, there is like a dragon or wyvern called Theodore. It's just amazing. And it is a male-male romance. I won't say who with. There's lots of magical creatures. It's so good. It is so unbelievably wholesome. But also, I think my favourite aspect of it, which I don't hear many people speak about, is how elegantly and carefully it deals with really deep and important issues, especially othering and sort of discrimination based on like really poor reasons. It's just so elegantly done. It's just weaved in. It's not really brought up as a point, but you feel it. You can feel it so much, and it's done so well, and it's so beautiful. I love all the characters in this, and There is a reason this one book alone made me pretty sure that TJ Klune was going to be a new all-time favourite author. So then, having read that, I was thrilled to find out that TJ Klune had another book coming out in 2020. And these are just the two that were like traditionally published. He also had self-published books. This man writes so much and I don't know how. But that's The Extraordinaries by TJ Klune, and this is a very different vibe, though it is also quite upbeat. I know a lot of his other books are much darker. Both of these are generally pretty happy books. But this one follows Nick, who lives in New York City, but there are superheroes in New York City. And he is utterly in love with one of them and writes fan fiction about it and all of this, and he is gay and all of his friends are queer, so many queer characters. And he somehow kind of gets involved with these superheroes, and I don't want to say too much, but it is so good. I laughed out loud so many times reading this book. Like, the fact that my green tabs are what I use for funny, and that is by far the predominant colour that I tabbed in this book, really says a lot. I just loved it so much. It's so funny. Nick's amazing. His relationship with his dad is adorable and evolves throughout the book in a really interesting way. I just love it so much. I cannot wait for the sequel coming out next year. I thought this was a standalone when I read it, and I read the final chapter, and I was like, oh, there we go. You know, there's a few things I wish had been explained, but I'll let it slide. And then there's a whole ass 3-page epilogue, which left a huge cliffhanger. So, you know, that's great. Now I need to wait for the sequel, which is coming out in July, I think. So I will survive until then if I have to. But yeah, absolutely love this. Such good fun. Could not recommend it more. But now we are down to the final two books I'm going to be talking about, which are what I would probably consider my two favourite books of the year. And they are two quite different books, and they are Docile by K.M. Spera and The Once and Future Witches by Alex Harrow. And yes, I just cut that together as carefully as I could so that you didn't get spoiled for this one, because it's literally that big hole in the shelf there. So let's talk about these two. So starting with Docile, this is a dystopian story, and I still don't know even how to process this. It's such an interesting concept. The tagline is "There is no consent under capitalism," and that really does just sum it up. Basically, this follows a society in which you can choose to pay off your debt by basically selling yourself into slavery and becoming a docile. And when you choose to do this, you actually get some level of control over what you will be doing when you are a slave, in that you basically interview with lots of people looking to buy someone, and you get some level of choice out of those who want you, who you go to, and therefore what you'll be doing. And our main character, Elijah, chooses to go to a guy called Alex and to basically become a sex slave. And when you are a docile, you are offered a drug called Dosaline, which basically completely zombies you. It means you will not remember anything that happens to you. But Elijah decides not to take this, which is seriously uncommon, just doesn't happen. And the number of trigger warnings for this book, I'm going to try and list some, but please do look them up, because I'm sure I am missing some, and I do not want to risk someone reading this book who is not in the right headspace to do so, because it does deal with some exceedingly dark topics. There is sexual assault, there is physical assault, there is huge amounts of sort of emotional manipulation, there is rape scenes basically in it, and it does deal with a lot of those things, but personally I just found the psychological aspect of it so fascinating. I love exploring the possibility of something like this. So as it says, there's no consent under capitalism. At what point is consent non-existent? You are choosing to sell yourself into slavery, but also that should never be obviously an option that it comes to, and it's still wrong. It's still obviously morally wrong. But where does the consent end? And obviously I'm in no way endorsing this sort of behaviour, but I find it an interesting thing to think about and contemplate, and it touches on so many different issues. The ending, I know, annoyed a lot of people. I personally, again, found it really interesting, because obviously it's a very abusive relationship between Alex and Elijah, but the way it is then come back to later, I'm not going to spoil the book for you, but I again thought it raised a very interesting point. I will stress again, please do not pick up this book if you are not sure it is the book for you, because it does deal with a lot of dark things and it does not hold back in the slightest. But if it is a book that you think you can handle, I would encourage you to read it, because I think it is such an interesting one just to set your brain thinking about really bad things, but in a really interesting way. And then moving on to a book with a very different tone, The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I was so incredibly nervous when I picked up this book, because The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Harrow was one of my favourite books of 2019, if not my favourite. And I was exceedingly nervous because this sounded like a completely different kind of story and I wasn't sure it was going to be for me. But look where we are. It's on this list. So obviously it worked. Alex E. Harrow's writing in this, in 10,000 Doors, was very different, but nonetheless still beautiful and still exactly the kind of writing I like in this. And this does follow three sisters who are descended from a line of witches in a world where witches have very much been eradicated in the Salem witch trials. They live in sort of an alternate history US in New Salem in the height of the suffragette movement, and they are basically gathering women to try and take witchcraft back and gain it again. It is so good. It follows these three sisters who are all on completely different paths from each other, and you follow each of them individually on their own journey, as well as their sort of relationships as sisters and the things they're working towards together. This is feminist, this is empowering, it is fascinating, it is beautifully written, as you would expect from Alex E. Harrow. I love it so much. I do actually have a full review video of this, which I filmed much sooner after reading it, so if you want to check that out, you can, up there, because I probably sum up my thoughts a lot better in that than right now. But oh, it's just phenomenal and I love it so much. And this has made me so incredibly excited to see what Alex Harrow comes out with next, because now I've had 2 books of hers in a row that I've loved this much. I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to be a hard push for me to not love her future books. So that's it. Those are my top 11 books of the year, plus some other special mentions. I had such a great reading year overall, so I'm pretty damn happy. But that's it. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know down in the comments what your favourite books were. Were any of these your favourite books, or any of these ones you want to read? Did you hate any of these? I'd love to know. But that's it for the video. So if you liked it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. Links to all my other social media, as well as the book clubs and read-alongs that I host, are linked down below in the description, as they always are, if you want to take part in anything. But that's it. So bye, and I'll see you in the next one.